You guys just missed a really funny episode of us talking to ourselves as we thought we were live with you guys here in the group. But it turns out now we are live in the community. So, hey guys, we're excited to be back and join you guys again in the Treasury Talent community. Again, I'm Donnie Gupton. I'm the ugly mug behind the scenes, the ones they keep behind closed doors for obvious reasons. So we have with us again today Simon Lynch, our fearless leader, Joe Grabowski, Scotty. What's up, guys?
Hey, Donnie, thanks for having us. We're excited.
Yeah. So we
just used all my best material, so I'll have to try and remember it so I can repeat
it. So I know we've been talking and planning for this, the topic today of the importance of, having a good plan for your job search. And so let's just dive right into that. Simon, I mean, let's just talk about, career development in general. Obviously important in any industry, but how does that apply specifically to our industry and Treasury here?
I think the key thing, Donnie, is from a career development perspective, there's no one right way to get through to the group treasurer role. As people have probably heard on the podcast, each of the group treasurers that are on there have had really different experiences to get there. So there's not one right way, there's not one path. What you really need to do is make sure that you understand where you want to get to and what that entails to get there. So I can't tell you the right way, but what I can do is, if you tell me what you want and how you want, what is the end game, we can help you to guide you around what you need to do to tick off those boxes. So, if the ultimate aim is I want to be like Joaquin at Salesforce and be the treasurer, then of a big global listed tech business like that, there's certain things you're going to need to do in order to get to that role. So you need to check off at some point the debt capital markets and the funding piece. You're going to have to definitely get experience in a global business to really get experience around FX, because that's going to be a really key part of that role. Likewise, you're going to need to get some really, really good experience around the treasury operations piece. And as we're seeing now in COVID, the thing that's driving everyone is cash and liquidity, processes and procedures around that. You really need to be all over that as being a fundamental in your career development. Then, you want to check off things like systems, TMSs. Have you implemented them? Do you really understand that? The accounting piece behind it. So there's a lot of things that you need to tick off, and certain businesses do parts of those and not others. So, you can be in a business right now that you're not getting FX experience. Well, you need to make sure that you're targeted in your next role to go to a global business where you can get that experience and check that off. Likewise, if you're in a tech business, you're probably not doing a lot around debt capital markets. And so going to a business that's debt hungry, capital intensive, is going to be a place where you can get that experience. So it's really just understanding what it is that you want and then targeting the right companies in your job search to tick off the experience that you need along that journey.
Well, it sounds like, one of the important things too, that you kind of brought up in a roundabout way, but it's really having a goal and a vision, right? Of where do I really want to go, so I can start mapping out what those next steps are in my career development journey, but really kind of having that mindset of like, yeah, I do want to be the treasurer one day. I see myself sitting in the shoes so that I can properly prepare myself. It sounds like that's critically important.
Totally, Donnie. It is. It's understanding where you want to go. And, only you know that. It's not something that someone else can tell you. I mean, they can probably guide you in the right direction of where you want to be. But, there are certainly people that don't want to be the group treasurer. They might be markets people and they just love, being trading in the markets every day. And they just want to be on that risk management side as a result. But it's understanding what are your strengths, what do you want, and what do I need to work on in order to get to where I want to be.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. Now, Joe, kind of once somebody's decided like, okay, yeah, I want to move my, change jobs or look at a new opportunity.
Yeah.
What should the plan be from there?
It's really going to be specific to each individual person. And what I always recommend and what I always ask, we talked about this a little bit last week, is just having decision-making criteria. Simon was talking about making sure to have or acquire the technical skills to get to where you want to be. It's all not going to matter if you're not happy what you're doing. And, it's what makes Scotty happy in a job and what makes Simon happy in a job is going to be different from what makes me happy in a job. And that's how you kind of use this. We have to define those criteria to make sure that we're enjoying the work that we're doing along the way, or else we're not going to be good at it. We're going to be flipping jobs every 3 to 6 months. And we're going to find ourselves in some really, really bad situations. So, you know, if you're just chasing money, if you're just chasing titles, you have to make sure that you're accounting for that as you're evaluating new opportunities that are coming to you. And we do notice trends, you know, at different levels and in different markets among those criteria. But I always tell people, be strategic and make sure that as you have new things that are coming into you, use those same criteria, because it's tough trying to figure out or try to match apples to apples when you have a job, say, in tech and a job, say, in renewable energy. How do you even do that? You got to find those common denominators, and ultimately that's going to be what makes you happy and what you're looking for out of that job. Right.
Now, kind of going to the next step of that, Scotty, I mean, if they're on that hunt, like what is the criteria then at that point that you know, they should be prepared for and be looking, you know, that the people are going to be looking for them?
So, yeah, I think, you know, just to piggyback off what both Simon and Joe have said thus far, first thing you want to do is try to come up with, I'd like to call it more of an outline than a plan. You know, plan, you can get your expectations to a certain point, and obviously if you don't meet those expectations, that could be tremendously disappointing. So have some flexibility built in, but start with an outline on kind of where you want to go. And from there, I think the whole purpose of what we're trying to convey in the meeting today is, you know, it's really important to think through some of this stuff ahead of time, right? Certainly, we are going to ask you what your top 3 criteria are, and I'll get to your question here in a minute on kind of the most common ones we see. But I think any good recruiter internally and also a hiring manager is going to want to know as well. And even if they don't explicitly ask, it's just really important. It's important to find that alignment. So specifically to your question, I mean, what we see, and like Joe said, this can vary depending on what level you are, what stage you are in your career, and there's some other factors too. But the most common ones that we see are, you know, first and foremost, probably not a surprise, is compensation or salary. You know, company culture is a big thing, and not just company, but also team culture is something that we see common among the top 3. Growth potential, right? And that goes back to Simon. It's like, if I've now felt like I've gotten a really strong handle on treasury operations, but my ultimate goal is to get to group treasurer, how am I going to now be able to grow into managing FX and IR exposure hedging, you know? And then, so some of the other things we see in that regards, job content, I hear that daily. The company itself, some people are very driven by, you know, hey, I want to get to Google. That's the goal for me. And then industry too is one that we see. And it goes back to, again, what Simon mentioned about, if you're at a tech firm that's got a lot of cash, you probably aren't going to get a lot of opportunity to work on big debt offerings. So you go to a capital intensive, that's, you know, a commodities company or a utility, and it's like the exact opposite. So those are some of the most common criteria that we see. But again, to Joe's point, the critical piece is to put a little bit of time into thinking about what is important to you and just be prepared. And then, you know, that kind of cliche that you're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you, you want to make sure you're vetting for, okay, am I going to hit my top criteria at this firm, right? So get answers to those questions throughout the interview process. And of course, we'd be there to guide you along the way.
And just to piggyback off of that, I mean, what you'll find is that as those boxes are being checked for you, you're becoming more ingrained in that interview process. You find yourself performing better, having better conversations as you're going through that process because you're getting excited about it. You start to see, oh, this meets A, B, C for me. This is the job for me. It doesn't even become a question of, you know, title, responsibilities, that type of stuff. It's just, does this meet my basic needs and get me to where I want to be? And then all of a sudden you find that a lot of, and your criteria is allowed to change along the way. That's the thing. You just have to really understand your drivers, your pushes, your pulls. And I mean, the rest kind of simplifies itself. That's the hard part.
Joe, I think that the other important thing there is we sort of touched on the fact that changes over the journey that you go on. I think for listeners out there, there's a really distinct difference between the treasury analyst through to senior manager level. And then once you hit Treasury Director and move your way through to the Treasurer role, I think that there's almost two different markets there, in that the more junior market is a very candidate driven. There's lots of jobs. It's obviously the bottom of the pyramid. It's where all of the volume is, and there's a lot more jobs there. And on the back of that, you'll find that it's very candidate driven. So you'll have lots of opportunities, you're in demand, and you'll progress your career really quickly, because there's not a group of graduates who come through every year. Everyone falls into Treasury. So the more junior roles, ironically, are the harder roles for us to fill. But the point being, at that junior end, once you get to senior manager, you'll see your career go really quickly to that point. And then you'll find all of a sudden it gets really competitive at the Treasury Director level through to the Treasurer. And you just need to really factor that into your search as well, is that it's not that you can't do the job. Like if you're moving into a director level role, there'll be plenty of times that you interview and you're in a process and someone else gets the role ahead of you. And that's just one person's decision. It's the treasurer or the CFO who's decided this is the person I want to hire. It doesn't really mean that the other 4 people who were interviewing couldn't do the job. They could all do the job, but only one person gets the end role. So it just flips from being candidate short, very candidate driven at the junior end, to job short, very much about, I'm going to be really specific as the hiring manager as to who I'm going to take in this role. And just you bear in mind that it's not that a lot of that is out of your control. So you've just got to do the best that you can, put yourself in more environments, more processes, so that you can be the one who gets the role and you can keep your career moving.
Yeah, and Simon, you touched on the themes that we typically see at those levels too, right? Analyst or senior manager, it's, I want the bigger title, I want more compensation, I want a bigger scope. By the time that you hit director level and above, we've noticed a trend where it switches from that to, look, I don't care what you call me. I just want to enjoy the work that I do. I want to enjoy the people that I work with, and I want to be paid a fair salary. So that's also why it makes it very much more competitive from a job seeker standpoint, because not only do you have the people who are already at, say, like a director level, but then you have the managers, the next wave, who are ready to become directors, and then you have the ATs and the treasurers who have that mindset at the same time. So now all of a sudden you're up against 4 different levels. And that's where, again, to your point, it comes down to soft skills and just how you get on with the people who are interviewing you. It becomes much more competitive for those reasons, and that's what we hear, and those are the common criteria that we hear each and every day.
And it's ironic as well, like you talked earlier about career development. The other thing that I think is really important to remember is Treasury is a small niche specialist area, and on the back of that, teams are relatively small. So what you'll find is, from a career development point of view, there's always a blocker above you. And the chances of getting the timing right for that person to move to a different role so that you can take their role is pretty slim. So that's where you're going to need to move externally, and this is where this whole discussion's coming from, is if you want to fast track your career and move up, you are going to have to think externally in order to probably get that move, unless you get really lucky.
Yeah. And we've got our first question, and for those of you watching live right now, feel free to ask any questions around job search. I'd also be curious if any of you guys are actually actively looking for a new position right now. But question from Gino: as we come out of COVID, do you think there are more specific Treasury job-related skills for market types which we may be in more need?
Look, I would say coming out of COVID, things are going to be pretty busy from a Treasury perspective. Like if you look at the market now, liquidity and cash are the drivers, right? So Treasury, in my guess, is probably the first person that CFO wants to talk to, and probably the last at the end of the day. They're front and center. They're really very much in demand, and I kind of think that like the GFC, coming into this, people probably underinvested in Treasury because we hadn't had a lot of volatility. And I like the Warren Buffett quote: "Is when things like this happen, you see who's been swimming naked." And the tide's definitely gone out. So I think there'll be definitely businesses that are caught swimming naked, and they're going to have to scurry to get some really good Treasury people in, because volatility, I don't think, is going to go away. So I hope that answers your question.
I think he was asking more like, is there any specific skills that he should be looking at, or he should be polishing up from a career development standpoint, specifically related to COVID?
There's nothing I can think of like specifically, in terms of skills. I think I mean, in answer to that question, the big thing generally that comes through is soft skills are what get you jobs. So, you know, I can't, can anyone else think of anything specifically around, I can't think of anything technically that, you know, COVID's just really highlighted liquidity and cash in my mind. There's nothing that's really come out of it that's technically different to pre-COVID. So it's just to continue to develop your skills. And as I just said, soft skills are what get you jobs. So, you know, that you can never spend too much time developing those. And that's through things like networking, you know, getting out there and chatting to people and helping to get those skills. That would be probably my answer, Donnie.
I would add just, you know, two things. One, an honest self-assessment. We talked about this last week, but, you know, try to, perhaps even if you're having a tough time doing that yourself, ask some peers or some people you trust to kind of give you an assessment of where they feel like you could improve. Because it goes back to just the whole topic here of creating a plan or an outline. What's important to you and where do you want to go? You know, if you have that in mind, then it's like, okay, well, where are the gaps in my skills currently that I need to address in order to get to that next step? So again, it's pretty highly individualized, but the first thing to do is to either do an honest self-assessment or ask some friends, peers, you know, anyone who knows your work product for their feedback to try to, you know, get that assessment and then focus on those areas.
Yeah, if I had to take a stab at it, just to add on to what Simon and Scotty were saying, probably the cash and liquidity management forecasting piece. I think, you know, some holes may have been exposed based on everything that's going on. Of course, you know, it's one of the basic building blocks of Treasury. But then I would look at the banking relationship management piece. I think that you can either save your company a lot of money or help your company out by knowing the levers that you can push and pull with your banks, and also debt management, debt covenants, that type of stuff. Just thinking about where and how these companies are evolving as this pandemic goes further, you got to kind of anticipate the type of skill sets that are going to be necessary coming out of this and whatever this new normal is going to look like once we get back to it, and try to anticipate that. And when you think about it, a lot of these companies, all of a sudden, the cash forecasting piece is just been blown up. And a lot of companies are taking on debts. So you're going to have to be able to leverage those banking relationships, being able to work with your bankers, negotiate interest rates, negotiate debt covenants, and everything that goes into that too. So, I mean, it's not anything that we haven't already been doing as Treasury specialists, or that you guys haven't been doing as Treasury specialists, but there are just certain areas to focus on. And that would be my take on it. Am I Nostradamus? No, but that would be just kind of reading the tea leaves where I can. That's what I would see.
Nice.
I think,
great
just
question.
sorry to Donnie to add one last thing there is a great rule of thumb, generally speaking, for anybody in any profession is to try to think in terms of where can I add the most value to my organization. So I think to Joe's point, those areas are pretty, right now especially, are highlighted, but it's just always thinking or viewing your career through that frame is a good, I think, rule of thumb.
Awesome.
Absolutely. And if you're looking to make yourself more marketable, if you are in an organization where, you know, taking Scotty's self-assessment into this, if you know you're thin in some of these areas, jump right the heck in, because you don't have, I mean, they'll give you the shot. There's work to be done there, and that only makes you more marketable as you go to take on your next job and your job after that. You're not trying to sell yourself in an interview. You're getting this experience with a company where you're approving commodities.
Honest self-assessment. Can anybody actually really do that?
Probably. I look in the mirror every day.
Hey, great question, Gino. Thank you. We got another question in from Jim, and Jim was wondering, what are your thoughts about geographic flexibility? Have you guys seen anything? Obviously, there's work from home stuff. What are your guys' thoughts on geographic flexibility moving forward?
Yeah, so kind of interesting. I came from the IT recruiting space where everything was moving toward a remote capacity, and that was one of the things I had to wrap my head around was, and I don't mean to paint with a broad brush, but when you look at Treasury, it was kind of that traditional accounting finance mindset where if the work's not being done in front of me, it's just not happening. And I remember Simon and I were out in California meeting with clients, and that conversation would come up, well, why don't you open this up remote? And in a roundabout way, those were the answers we were getting. So moving forward, I think into a forced nature, we are starting to see that, hey, this can work. Even though it's in the middle of a pandemic, we are seeing that Treasury professionals can still function. The Treasury function is still, it's churning on. The machine is still moving. Will that allow for some flexibility? I think it will, but I still think there's going to be that element where you have to have people in the office to build culture, to build the operations, to build the processes, especially with the larger companies that have like a rotational program. If you're bringing someone in from, say, FP&A, you're not going to be able to effectively train someone by doing it over Zoom. It doesn't matter how many videos you make or anything like that, because that person's not right there next to you to ask those questions and to get ramped up properly. It's you're still going to have, there are gaps that technology can fill and gaps that technology can't. So I think if anything, you'll move more to a hybrid model. And I'm hoping, my hope for this is that coming out of this, we'll see more flexibility with remote and geographically distributed teams.
I think that the questions being asked now, like, we'd never have remote roles before. We've just filled one, the first role that we've ever, in 8 years that we've ever filled that was remote, geographically agnostic. I just filled a job yesterday where, going into COVID, the CFO, and he lost a candidate on the back of the fact that he wouldn't provide flexibility. So they had to be in the office. The lady who got offered it first time round wanted, 3 days from home. And he said no. 2 months later, I've just had the same job offered again to another lady, and he's agreed to 3 days out of the office. So I can definitely see a change in people's attitudes towards it. I don't think geographically agnostic is going to be with us coming straight out of this, but I'm really hopeful that it opens up the talent pools and people are a little bit more open-minded to it. But I think we've got a little bit of a journey to go on that.
Yeah, got another question here. Good question, Jim, and hopefully that answers that for you. Another one from Fadwa. Do you think taking a 6 months gap between two jobs will have a bad impact on my job search, or on the job search? Sorry, didn't know my there. But
my view on this is that as long as you can explain what you've done in your career, it doesn't matter. So everyone's been laid off, everyone's been made redundant. Like that's the way of the world these days. Back when I started in recruitment, it was really negatively thought about. So no, I don't think so. If you're taking it off because you want to do some study, you want to spend time with family, as long as you can explain what you've done in a way that makes sense, then I don't see it as a problem.
Scotty, Joe, any other feedback on that?
Oh, he took the words out of my mouth. Sorry.
I think the only thing to add, and this is, this is a topic for another day, but it's, if you're finding that you're not having success, with your resume, the possibility of actually adding what you did and addressing that objection up front exists as well. And I'm not saying that you should do that. I think to Simon's point, just the ability to explain the gap is the critical piece. But again, if you're after you do that and you find that your resume is not attracting the kind of attention that you'd like, perhaps actually explicitly saying on the resume what you did, insofar as you're comfortable doing that, is the approach to take.
Excellent. We just got good feedback from Leanne saying, thanks, Simon. Great answer, especially if one is in transition due to life changes. And
yeah, feedback. I think that's really important, Donnie, because like life happens, right? And it's not like business is brutal these days, and it's not necessarily an individual's fault if they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, and like life happening, you might have kids, you might have issues with family, like all of that stuff is reality. And I think most people now are aware of that. And I don't think it might be an excuse they use, but I don't think it's really the decision that they use to make, to get the right person into their business these days. I hope it's not anyway.
If it is, you probably don't want to work for that company, right?
Spot on, Scotty. I agree with you.
Excellent. Well, anybody else have anything to add? I mean, I think that kind of wraps up everything for today. I know next week we have do we have a guest with us next week, Joe?
We do.
Yeah. We have Tanya from the North Carolina Treasury Management Association. She's going to talk about the benefits of joining a Treasury Management Association if you aren't a part of one already, and just kind of the stuff that they work on down in North Carolina. And it'll just be a live discussion with her.
Excellent. looking forward to having her on. Looks like we got one more question coming in. Let's see if we can answer this for you. Okay, with respect to the advice you have given, I was wondering whether there is any geographic heterogeneity.
I don't understand the question.
I was hoping one of you guys did.
So if we're
hey, Donnie, I'm going to have to go. So let's think about that one and chat about it next week.
Yeah,
Joe, maybe a dictionary.com for that. I don't know if I'm smart enough to field that's a vocabulary quiz right there is what that is.
Yeah. Francisco, we're going to have to get back to you offline after we do a little research on that question there, man. You've outsmarted us on that one. But we definitely appreciate the question. So we'll give you some feedback offline. Weather in Europe is the same as in USA. He was asking basically if he's in, it sounds like he's probably in maybe in Europe or USA. I'm not sure.
okay.
But yeah, no, I think that advice is probably the same. I think no matter where you're at in the globe right now, I think everybody's kind of going through the same thing when it comes to looking at remote workforce and things like that.
I'm feeling even more sheepish now that English is a second language, and I still don't understand the question.
No, it's tough to speak about employment trends outside of the U.S. because the U.S. is what we know. Simon knows Australia. When it comes down to it, we're tracking analytics around all these different markets. So if it's a question around where are the hot spots across the U.S., yeah, we can provide that type of insight around where we're seeing hiring spikes, where we're seeing companies hiring. If it's anything around EMEA, probably not going to be as much just because we don't know those markets. We don't have presence there.
There are some comments coming in around qualifications that are recognized in the U.S. and Europe, vice versa, being transferable and things like that. So these are all great questions, guys. We have to wrap it up for today, but we'll definitely keep these topics going. As you see this, we're going to be coming on these things every Wednesday, same time right now, live. Feel free, and we'll ask a question in the group about what topics, what do you guys want to hear about, so we can give you more feedback on everything. And we definitely appreciate you guys being here in the questions that you have. Harkesh, we'll get to your question too, which is, have you created any COVID-related treasury solutions? For recruiting, we can definitely help you, with the job search, part of that thing there. We don't have any solutions specific to treasuries, so to speak. But we do have a podcast that Simon has created. If you go to treasurytalent.com, you'll be able to check out our podcast. And a couple weeks ago, Simon did specifically on the post-COVID economy here. So that would be a great resource for you to check out, Harkesh. But for everybody else, Simon, or do you want to add to that?
Oh, I was just going to say, we get the occasional technical question that's probably better suited for a practitioner that comes across in the Treasury Talent community. Fully invite anyone who has the knowledge. Go ahead with that discussion. If there's anything company A is doing that company B should be thinking about, you're not exposing trade secrets, anything like that, by all means, feel free to connect with each other. That's part of this. What we're able to speak to is going to be more hiring related, more recruiting strategy, hiring strategy. We're not practitioners by nature, unfortunately. I don't have the technical knowledge. I just know how to talk about it.
Excellent. I can technically treasure. Is that a technically way of saying it? But everybody, thank you for being here with us today. We'll see you guys next week. Feel free to reach out to us at treasurytalent.com if you have any questions about your job search, and we would love to help you out. We'll talk to you guys all soon.